Good evening. Thank you for being here in person. Thank you for being online. We do have an audience here in person, and I want to welcome you to the James Castle House. It's great that you guys are here. I know it's a nice hot day outside, so I hope this feels good in here. My name is Monica Galvan, and I'm the Cultural Science Program Coordinator here at the James Castle House. And tonight we have Ariana next to me and Sierra McCliver, who will be providing ASL interpretation. I like to give an introduction to the James Castle House for anybody who's unfamiliar to the James Castle House. We celebrate the life and work of American artist James Castle through exhibitions, community programs, research, residency program, and conservation of historic spaces where Castle lived and worked for over 4 decades. And the James Castle House is a program of the Boise City Department of Arts and History, which I want to thank for their ongoing support and their commitment to the work that we do here. Before I move on with this event, I'd like to acknowledge the broader history of the land the James Castle House sits on. We recognize the ancestral, cultural, traditional, and unceded territory of the Shoshone, Bannock, and Northern Paiute people whose land land sits on today. Sorry, we're good. Okay. In this room where we're sitting, we have a display and exhibition right now. So this exhibition is where art begins. The people and places of the Historic Artist Home and Studios program. It places James Castle on this beautiful wall over here with the wallpaper that we've recreated. Within the broader conversation about preserving the creative spaces of American artists as essential landmarks of the nation's cultural heritage and enduring source of inspiration. And I want to mention that next week on July 25th, Valerie Balint, the director of HOS, will be giving a talk here at the James Castle House, and we'd love to have you all back. You can find information online for registration, and it will be hybrid, so those of you online can also register. Now, let's go ahead and go on to our main event. We're excited that Ariana is here, and they will be sharing with us their experience here at the James Castle House. After the presentation, we will have a question and answer period, so please, we've been asked, are we going to do an assignment? You can draw if you want, doodle, but those are available for you to write down any thoughts or any questions that might come up. And then Mackenzie and Kristen will bring them to us so we can answer. And for those of you on Zoom, please put them in the chat and we will ask those as well. Okay, now let me introduce to you Ariana. Ariana is an interdisciplinary artist based in the Bronx, New York, working across print, sculpture, and time-based media. Ariana explores sensory perception and spatial navigation. Through writing, printmaking, and audio experiments, the work Ariana has created during their stay at the James Castle House invites us to reimagine how we come to know a place and how we might create new access points into both our physical surroundings and interior worlds. Ariana has made intentional connections with people and places here in Boise, and I've loved witnessing them. I especially love visiting the James Castle Collection and Archive with them. Ariana's contagious joy as they explore James Castle's artwork was one that I haven't experienced before. And their curiosity about process, material, and engagement with place and space really shows their appreciation for Castle's practice. I'm excited to hear what you have to offer, what you have to say about your experience here tonight. I'm going to go ahead and sit down and leave you with Ariana.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Monica, for that really lovely and joyous introduction, and thank you all for being here. almost all of you I've met in the process, like over the course of the time that I've been here, which is such a gift. I felt extremely welcome and connected to this place, to the James Castle House, but also to Boise more broadly, and to all the people who've truly welcomed me into the city with open arms. So I can't say that enough. That's been a huge, huge component of this experience for me. So thank you, all of you. So I have made this presentation that hopefully will give you some insight into my background, but will get to the point eventually of the work I've actually made here. So the presentation I've tongue in cheek, but also quite seriously called Riverbed, and we will figure out why a little later. But for those of you who may not have talked with me extensively, I'll give a little bit of background. So I am a multimedia artist, as was stated in the introduction, and I'm currently based in the Bronx, but I've lived all over. I grew up kind of in the southern United States, in Texas, Georgia, Florida, Kansas. Then I went to school in Rhode Island, and then I moved back to New York with my mom. And so I say this all, I give my geographic history pretty much anytime I do an introduction, to emphasize that like my relationships to place and my preoccupation with place actually comes from a experience of transience. And I think that's a little bit different than a lot of the discourse around place, which relies on narratives of rootedness or belonging, which is not something that I necessarily have or can take for granted. It's something that I have to make and find everywhere I go. So that condition of being, of transience, and of sort of finding your way through whatever place you end up in became amplified as I became an adult, due to a completely other set of factors that have to do with my own body and changes to my own body and changes to the way I perceive the world around me. So, and I think this will become more clear as I continue on, but I make work about the ways our sensory worlds, our interior perception of stimuli, light, sound, texture, affects how we move through the world, both like from a navigational or geographic standpoint, but also from a cultural and social standpoint. And I came to learn about James Castle's work a few years ago, in 2021, 2022, thereabouts, during a period of my life where I was both extremely isolated, right? It's early COVID time, lockdown time. And for me, I was also very, very sick with, an illness that I didn't quite understand yet. So I was not leaving the house. And I learned about James Castle's work and through a friend who had gifted me a book, the Memory Palace book. And that book opened up this series of infinities from someone who had spent their entire life basically directly observing, intensely observing just a few locations in their immediate surroundings. And so you can imagine that like during that precise moment, 2021, 2022, and many of us, especially those of us who are vulnerable medically or are, caregivers or what have you, are really, really forced to contend with the kind of four walls around us. And in fact, that like there are ways out of that feeling of isolation and entrapment by seeing the like material and narrative and observational potential in everything. So that's the kind of backstory I come here today with you with, but I want to take you on a little bit of a journey of what led to that realization and to my preoccupation with this work and my journey here. So we'll backtrack a little bit. But I want to start with some questions that continue to inform my work, but come from different stages in my journey. But this is a question I used to ask when I was trying to explain to people in 2021 and 2022 what my life felt like. I would kind of begin the conversation, have you ever crossed a field of fresh snow? And that is the question I used because if you think about whiteout conditions, like blizzard conditions, like your entire landscape is familiar, but it's changed in this fundamental way. Everything about it is slightly unfamiliar, and things haven't quite maintained their shape. They're much more vague. They're hard to discern. You might get lost, in a field you've crossed 1,000 times, right? So this is Lake Michigan. This is the shore of Lake Michigan in Chicago. This is where I was living at the time. And there was this day where there had been a massive snowstorm and also really strong wind conditions. And the wind and the snow, the movement of the snow due to the wind created this marbling texture of the sand and the snow. And it was this, again, this like truly new condition in a place that I had gone and spent time in over and over and over, but it felt completely alien. Like it felt like I was on another planet. And the rest of my life felt like I was on another planet. I was having some very strange, mostly neurological and visual symptoms. I was having these like really intense migraines, or what I thought were migraines. And then I was having kind of double vision, ghosting, like trouble kind of tracking movement, things like that were just really inexplicable. And it felt like I had to put my life on hold. I was in a computer heavy job. I was an audio engineer. I was quite good at it. I had a whole career, and I had to stop working in that field. And this was one of the things that I made after I figured everything out, but it gives the story of what was happening at that time.
I did the lumbar puncture and it was not as painful as I thought it was going to be at all. I feel really grateful to have caught it early on. Unfortunately, they did find the condition we were hoping to rule out. So I did get some bad news. Idiopathic intracranial hypertension, which basically feel a lot like migraine, but aren't migraine optic nerves and cause vision problem. Left untreated, it can cause like vision loss. So hopefully, like right now, I can just manage it with medication and some changes to.
Formal visual fields are usually performed by placing the patient's head in a white bowl and having her maintain her gaze straight ahead.
The technician seats me in front of a luminous hollow, as if a wide, wide bowl had been turned on its side, its open mouth spilling a soft, white light.
Okay, look straight ahead. We will begin by setting the tracking for your eye.
From this perspective, it's as if my entire world is the luminous field. Swaths of fresh snow, or sun-bleached prairie, or silver sand.
And you can see that it's blinking on and off because it's tracking her eye. Okay, we will begin the test.
Okay, so that piece was made in 2023 after I had gotten diagnosis and treatment for this thing called idiopathic intracranial hypertension, which is basically a problem of the circulation of cerebrospinal fluid. And if that's not dealt with, it can cause a kind of crowding of the optic nerves and cause vision problems. And also it's just very painful. And luckily now, like I have treatment for it, I'm doing a-okay as far as like one can be. A lot of people with this condition don't do as well as I do. So I've gotten very lucky. But that, even though I was interested in problems of perception and space and the environment before this change in my entire world, in the way that I could do basic tasks, in the way that I did my art practice, in the way that I worked for money, in the way that I navigated a new city I was in, like all of those fundamental shifts in my life, I think cemented my creative and research interests kind of in this inevitable, unavoidable way. And so what you're seeing on the screen is a embossed drawing, which I make a lot of them now, but I started making them kind of when I stopped working in the ways that I had been for a while, which was mostly digitally, mostly on screens, which became very painful, and started to move toward more tactile ways of making again. And my creative background is in sculpture. I have an undergraduate degree in sculpture and also urban studies. And I had sort of put those things aside for a career in radio and broadcasting, which was great. But then I needed to pivot, and I found methods that worked even when I was not feeling my best. And this kind of started my return to sculpture and my return to printmaking, and specifically the embossed textured surface, and thinking about the surface of paper as a sculptural or tactile problem more so than a visual problem. So these are some more of those early embossed drawings. And most of them have this sort of vague landscape or sort of almost diagrammatic or mapping type of constellation in them. And as I started to get better in Chicago and I could go out more, I spent a lot of time still at Lake Michigan. It was, you know, if I was feeling okay enough to like get out of the house, I would go take a long walk by the lake. And I got really obsessed with this place called the Montrose Point Bird Sanctuary. And it's a protected wilderness area on the shores of Lake Michigan that is home to a population of endangered piping plovers. And this is their migrating path is right over this plot of land alongside Lake Michigan, which used to be a military site. It was actually slated for missile launching during the Cold War, but that never came to pass, right? They didn't need to use those missiles, but the land was still developed with that purpose until it was finally rehabilitated to return to the state where it could be habitable for these birds that are really, really important regionally to the area. And so that's happening north-south is this bird migration, and then east-west, there are planes carrying human beings across from the East Coast over Lake Michigan west. And so this crossing of two kinds of migration, of two kinds of beings that have, in fact, contradictory needs in many ways, right? The planes are interrupting the flight path of the birds. That became very interesting to me. I started thinking about birds and the ways birds had of sensing the environment that I didn't, that I was envious of. Birds have the ability to sense magnetic fields. That's what allows them to navigate through space. And you know, theoretically, it's a way of navigating that isn't about seeing where you're going. It's a totally other perception. And so I became very interested in magnetic fields. And you know, human beings, we have tools that allow us to perceive magnetic fields, namely compasses. So I began building my own compasses in situ, in the field, and navigating through the Montrose Point Bird Sanctuary with this manual compass that I constructed on site. I got really into flying kites. Again, interested in, you know, even just conceptually the idea that birds have hollow bones. It's like, how beautiful is that? Like that they have this adaptation of their bodies that allows them to remain airborne. Like that's just beautiful and amazing. And kites felt like a close to that. And so this is a video of me flying a kite inside Lake Michigan. The kite is shaped like a bird, which is funny. And these were the things that got me through, that like made me find ways of being in my body that felt good. And coincidentally, those ways of being in my body that felt good brought me into the natural. And so this relationship that could have remained very like separate or occasional, or I make deliberate choices to go spend time in nature, became just a daily necessity, like breathing. You know, it became a way of being that was not optional. And that just continued. And I eventually got well enough that I decided to really reinvest in my art career. And I decided I was going to go back to school after 5 years away. So I got into school in New Jersey, and I ended up leaving Chicago and going to New Jersey. And the first 2 months I'm there. I'm, in New Brunswick, New Jersey. It's a very car-centric city, not a lot of nature around. It's feeling pretty bleak, to be honest. And I find this severed bird wing in front of my studio on the sidewalk. It's as if it was so clean. It was as if it was as if it had been like mechanically separated. It was so clean. So I have to assume that it was some sort of car or accident or something that resulted in this. But it was so jarring and distressing, but also like this moment where I felt real reverence for this creature that I knew was part of the land I was on, but that I rarely saw because of the way the land had been developed. And so what I did, because I didn't feel like it was my place to move this bird wing, to displace it, to take it with me, to bury it somewhere else. It just felt like that's not my job, my role in this ecosystem. Like it just needs to let it be. But I ended up taking a very detailed photogrammetry scan, so a 3D scan, using hundreds of photos, very detailed photos that then get reconstructed digitally into a 3D model. And it felt like a kind of digital memorial for this bird. And there was something about like this compassion for another body that I felt like even at a distance, it was possible to articulate. And so I think a lot of the work I make inadvertently is also about some amount of like grief and acceptance, right? When your body changes, or when, or even when death happens, right? When a body ceases to exist. And I think that's like part of the natural world, that's part of natural cycles in the world, but something that we are deeply averse to as human beings and do our best to ignore when bodies fail or stop. And another question that came up in my practice around that time was, what reminds you of your own solidity? And this comes specifically from the work of Mel Baggs, who is a deeply revered disabled elder. I'll lovingly refer. Mel Baggs was someone whose main modes of communication were really with physical engagement with other objects, beings in the world. Also writing, but is mainly this like tactile engagement with the world. And there's Mel Baggs wrote prolifically, specifically about relationships with stones, with rocks. And there's so many blog posts, poems, essays, but there's a poem that is called Sleeping with Granite that I'm going to read a little tiny bit of real quick, and maybe that'll help anchor us together in that feeling. So this is an excerpt. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I sleep with granite on my belly because its heaviness anchors me and tells me where my body is. I sleep with granite on my belly because I sat with family on mountainsides made entirely of granite as far as you could see. I sleep with granite on my belly because it sings me rough but soothing songs about the feeling it gets in the noonday sun. I sleep with granite on my belly because granite made friends with me before I had human friends. And in 2023, 2024, I was thinking a lot about what it meant to feel anchored and grounded, and to feel that not just in an abstract way or in a social way, but in a fundamental, like elemental way. And so this is a work called Worry Stone Ritual, and it's a participatory work. So there's a kind of, I call it an altar of 3 prints. I call them 3 devotions. And they're all grids of monotype images of stones of various shapes joined together with the actual impressions of string or rope. So they're all different sized grids, but it's the same elements in these configurations. And then there's a fourth print that serves as kind of a map for a collection of objects. So some of those objects are woven sculptures made from waxed linen thread. Some of them are hand carved from balsa wood or basswood. Some of them are pieces of leather that have been sewn into the shape of rocks. There are actual rocks taken from various points of my own collection, which I've had for 25 years. And so they all come from different places. Again, I've grown up a lot of places, I've been to a lot of places, and I have a piece of each of those places with me all the time. And the way this worked was I set out an initial arrangement when the exhibition opened, and then I allowed viewers throughout the exhibition's run to recompose that arrangement. And the funny thing is, on the last day, the arrangement was this: a perfectly gridded, exact, orderly configuration. And that just, to me, speaks to, people wanting some sort of logic, some sort of anchor in the world. It was not my intention to force a sort of regimented arrangement of these materials, but that's what happened. In this initial experiments with touch and with inviting touch into objects, I realized there was a problem. The problem was that this conflict between prescribing how one should interact with a set of objects or the world broadly, and the desire for an open dialogue that comes from and is based entirely in touch, which is that is the thing I'm interested in. I'm interested in language without speech. I am interested in language that comes from a shared sensory experience rather than a shared idea, or a shared conception of a shared meaning that comes from text or speech. And I thought again about where that desire made itself known. And it was, during this time when I was really sick and I was at Lake Michigan and I was having these really profoundly opening and healing experiences with all kinds of other beings, with grass and stone and ice and birds and water. And I thought about my own body and what it began to tell me. So over the last few years, my body has become very sensitive to changes in temperature and humidity and atmospheric pressure. So one of the things that really will put me into a pain flare is a change in atmospheric pressure. So say a big storm is rolling in and the pressure drops. The pressure inside me rises. So I feel like my head is full of cotton, like I'm on a transatlantic flight for days at a time. That's what it feels like. I also get like a very strange kind of tingling, numbing, prickly feeling down the right side of my body. And it terminates here on my pinky finger. And so I started making these wooden, I guess, prosthetics in some way that mapped onto these pain points in my body. And they weren't meant to necessarily translate onto others what my body felt like, but it was a way for me to externalize a feeling that lived only kind of in sometimes it felt like my imagination, right? It didn't feel like something that I could describe and prove, right? And that is often the problem with invisible disability or sickness. And so these weren't necessarily to make others feel what I feel. They were a way to help me articulate to myself what I feel. But then I started making objects that were for others, for feeling with others. And not for me to tell someone else what I feel, but for us to feel something new together. And so this is a sculpture called It Blooms from the Marrow, and it's 2 pieces of wood from Lake Michigan that have been pressure fit into these woven sockets. These are waxed linen thread, U-shaped forms on either side that their openings precisely fit these pieces of driftwood. And the form has just enough give to make you think that, oh, I could sort of twist it, I can sort of pull it, I can sort of manipulate it, but you have to kind of feel out the pressure, feel out the resistance, feel what is possible to do with this form without breaking it. And I was very interested in that dynamic. Like, how can we share this feeling together? How can we respect the integrity of this object and also the like strength and weakness of each other and the communication with each other? How can we communicate through this object? And so I started making a bunch of them, all different kind of iterations and tests of this idea, some of them more successful than others. And this one is one that is based off of my own feeling of cold water swimming, of that ebb and flow of coming up for air, of kicking the water back behind you. So that was the sensation I was thinking of when I was making this form, but it was not something that I demanded the other person understand or know. All I needed them to do was to have their own experience feeling this object, having a sensory experience with this object, determining for themselves what it meant or did. And this practice of like co-creating a space for sensory exploration and for movement deepened when I met my collaborator, Lucy Little, who also spent a lot of time in Chicago and also shares some of the experiences of chronic pain and sickness as I do. And so this is a video of Lake Michigan in November. The beautiful thing about it is that the surface of the lake is perfectly glass smooth and it's meeting a perfectly cloudless horizon. And at the horizon line, there is the bleeding edge of what is called the anti-twilight arc. And the anti-twilight arc is a phenomenon that occurs not because the sun is setting on this end, right? We're looking east, so the sun is not setting east, but the sun is setting west and reflecting light around the curve of the earth and reaching us on the eastern horizon, which is just such an amazing, beautiful, incredible, miraculous thing. And I still think about it and it like makes me emotional. But I started working with Lucy, who's a musician, and I realized that I wanted to take this idea of like shared sensory experience to its kind of farthest extent. And but in order to do that, in order to make work that reflected a really intense sensory experience, I needed to go and do something again that I hadn't done in a long time, which was swim in Lake Michigan in the cold, which I did all the time as a kind of sort of way to deal with pain or distract from pain, was to swim in this body of water that was cold for much of the year. So Lucy and I took a trip in December of last year, and I swam the lake December 17th. And so I'm swimming, you can see my tiny little head bobbing up over on the I guess right hand of the screen. Lucy's dog Phoenix is keeping watch over me on the shore. And while we were out here, we also did some field recording of the inside of the lake, of its voice and its body. And you can sort of, it's a bit quiet, but you can hear it. Sound of Lake Michigan, glassy and bulbous, a swelling rhythm broken by crystalline captures. And when I was here recording the lake, I imagined also very much completely like, yeah, it was also a sort of conversation with the lake. And if the lake and I spoke the same language, maybe this is what it might have sounded like. My questions are in the regular text, and the lake is in the bold text. And I might ask, what kind of body are you? And the lake might tell me, I am fractured earth. I am molten glacier. Inside of me, there are many other bodies. What kind of body are you? And I might say, like you, I am mostly water. Inside of me, there is a long column of bone, and inside of that, there is an electric thread. The thread burns bright and hot. And the lake might say, I'm getting warmer too. My heart is cold and deep within. I am trying to stay cold. I might say, how deep is your heart? The lake might say, it is at the bottom of one of the earth's open mouths. She opened for me long ago when I still moved as ice. When you are with me, do you feel my heart? And I would say yes. The lake might ask, where? And I'll tell the lake, in my fingertips, there is a prickling affection, the warmest cold. And at the base of my neck, a cradle of ice. And breath, and beneath the folds of my hair, a delta of blood vessels flooded with your love. And so this imagined conversation became the subject of a performance that was
first yesterday. It was warmer than usual. I got blessed with a patch of sun, a break in the wind. So rarely do I reach a place like this, where I'm only breath. December 17th, 2024.
I went for a swim yesterday. It was warmer than usual. I got blessed with a patchy sun, a break in the wind. So happy. Wow. December 17th. December 17th, 2024. I went for a swim yesterday. It was warmer than usual. I got blessed with a patchy sun. So wow.
I made love.
One person. So whatever you do, I reach a place.
And at first, like I love you. There's one you. That was with a patch of snow. And then so I think they had to keep me out there when he was 17. And made for me. And first when yesterday, there was a river down on that car.
I got blessed with a patchy sun, a break in the wind. As if there's where I'm only breath. I went for a swim yesterday. It was warm. Got blessed with a patch of sun, a break in the wind. So where I went to an energy place like this, where I'm only breath. I went for a swim yesterday.
What that was this sculptural environment that I had been building for about a year based off of the shore of Lake Michigan, where I had this where my relationship with my body and my relationship to land really fundamentally changed. And it was with Lucy, who also had very similar experiences in her own body and with the same place, that we were able to develop this narrative environment that didn't rely on like a straightforward linear story. You see that it loops, it layers, it fragments. Lucy and I improvised for 20 minutes entirely without preparation. So all the music you're hearing is Lucy responding to my movement in that space and my interactions with objects in that space. And so this idea that it is possible to connect in a way that doesn't rely on us knowing the exact same ideas, the exact same speech became clear to me, and like is the foundation of what I want to do moving forward. And the last question that I think lives in my work, and a question that I like ask others who interact with my work, is what kind of body are you? All of us have distinct, unique sensory experiences that shape our like practical ways of living in the world, but also our like intellectual, emotional, cultural frameworks for how we understand the world. These two things, can't be separated. And for me, I would say that I've learned that I'm a body that confuses space and time. And the specifics of that realization are what I have been working on while I've been here at the James Castle House. My body confuses inside and outside, now and then, form and emptiness, speech and silence, awake and asleep, river and bed. This is a quote from a text that I really love about beds and about being a person who spends a lot of time in bed, being a person who spends a lot of time in bed due to sickness or disability. And there's a tiny segment that just says, "We say the world is passing us by, which is to say it is blurring outside while I am blurring in here." And this is from a decolonial feminist epistemology of the bed, a compendium incomplete of sick and disabled queer brown femme bodies of knowledge. So I've been making a lot of work about sleep here at the James Castle House because I learned earlier this year that I have narcolepsy. And I have a kind of narcolepsy that is an autoimmune condition. So it exists because my body has decided to attack a transmitter in my brain that determines when I'm supposed to be asleep or awake. And the thing with narcolepsy is people think that it's, oh, you just sleep a lot. It's a total blackout. And you're just fully asleep more than you should be. But what narcolepsy really is, it's a flickering of consciousness. So there's a lot of time where I am concretely asleep and I'll fall directly into REM sleep, like full dreaming, full, like very deep, like completely out asleep. But there's a lot more time where I'm actually hovering between being fully awake and fully asleep. And this can happen when I'm in conversation. This can happen when I'm sitting by the river. This can happen when I'm in a meeting like this. Has happened many times. And so my sense of time is fragmented and blurring all the time. And I'm often in 2 or more places at once, my dream world and this world. Sometimes they are separate, sometimes they are overlapping, sometimes they are competing for my attention. When I am in bed, I am traveling. I am a stone skipping across water between worlds. Even when I am not in bed, I am traveling to those same places. The French have a phrase for the state between sleeping and waking, which loosely translates between dog and wolf, which I thought was funny. The dog being awake, perhaps more controlled, domesticated, and the wolf being the sleep side, the dark side, the wild side. And in our culture here in the US, we're often told that no one wants to hear your dreams. Like if you wake up in the morning, you're waking up, with your partner or your roommates or whatever, it's not necessarily invited to share the entire contents of your last night's dreaming. It's either bothersome or trivial or inappropriately intimate. But what does that mean for me if a lot of my life, a lot of my day-to-day life is spent in some sort of dream world. Do none of those experiences matter? Do none of those insights, do none like have any relevance to anything that's happening in the waking world? Do I not learn anything or discover anything on the sleep side? And furthermore, there are places all over the world, not here, where culturally it is very, very important to share your dreams, that you wake up in the morning and you share freely, willingly what happened in sleep, because it's known and understood to be important to what happens in the waking world. So this is a dream that I'm going to share with you all, out of turn, as they say. And it's this is a dream that I had, let's see, I think it was in early January, but it'll make sense for those of you who've seen the work in the studio. I am dreaming in the shape of a folded paper fortune teller, the kind I used to make when I was young, frantically coloring their interior folds with layers of nearly dried Crayola marker. The dream story keeps changing, but with the same figures appearing in different configurations. Sometimes we are much older or younger than we are in waking life. We are partnered and separated in different configurations, sometimes seeing and knowing each other's faces, but regarding each other as strangers. Other times holding each other as if we are the only solid thing left in the world as it's unfolding. Land moves, buildings crumble, streets twist into new routes. Weather changes, a lake is born to fill a desert is born in the shape of a lake. Every time the dream changes, I feel it in my body as blooming pressure across my chest. Every few turns, after a few turns, I become lucid. I know I am dreaming, and I know the dream is layered, that it has a specific and familiar architecture I've held in my hands many times before. Versions of us collide, moments pulled from other timelines, pressed together as translucent paper leaves, and I can see through to your side of the world. Sometimes we know the shape of the story we are in, and we know, without fear, that we will meet again. There are times when the fold is so deep that no light reaches. I cannot see you, but I can feel that you are near. I wait for an opening. I try to stay with the dream as long as possible, to ask for one more turn, for it to open and reveal another possibility for me and for you and for all of us. Anne Carson, a poet and classicist known for her translations of mostly ancient Greek texts, has wrote extensively about sleep. It appears often in her poems, in her translations, in her essays. And there is an essay of hers that I really love called "Every Exit is an Entrance." And in it, she says, there is so much sleep to read. There are so many ways to read it. And I don't know, reading that essay gave me courage, I think, to take the reading of my dreams seriously, not necessarily seeking interpretation, like one correct answer that comes from knowing what a dream means, but like investing time in gaining some sort of insight or meaning or significance from the time I spend dreaming. My disabled body holds open a door. Inside, the world reorders and reveals itself. So, well, I've been here. I was telling some folks earlier that I had stumbled upon a thrift store in town that had tons and tons and tons of National Geographic magazines. And I picked them up as any artist slash collector slash prolific gatherer of things takes back to their studio. I started just clipping text from them mostly. Not really sure what I was going to do with them, but I was using the text to write these sort of warm-up poems in the studio. Something that I could do that I was like, this is not part of the reason I'm here. This is not part of the main project I'm doing. I was very sure that I was going to make a sculptural basket work, which I did, which you can see in there. And I was very sure I was going to make some prints, but I had no intention at all of doing any writing. And so the writing that I was doing I was not taking too seriously because these aren't even my words, right? They're coming from this pile of 1970s magazines. I'm never going to show these to anybody. It doesn't matter. But the more I wrote, the more invested I became in this dismantling and unraveling of one reality and reconstructing another. And this is a fragment of a very long, big, like you'll see the tables in there. If you can imagine one of those tables completely covered in these poetic constructions. But this one says, because it's free and glued together and beautiful, the common history is the force behind bonding, an heirloom dream built into the land. Read it. And they just kept growing and growing. And then I started doing some research into National Geographic magazine. National Geographic magazine is interesting because it has a pretty difficult history in that it comes out of the National Geographic Society, which was founded in, I think, 1888, if my memory serves me correctly, by 13 very wealthy, elite philanthropists, academics, so-called explorers. National Geographic, in its earliest portrayals of non-Western people, did some pretty tokenizing, poor representations of the other, right? National Geographic, would evolve over its many decades of life and would try to correct some of these historic wrongs, but also would run ads for, oil companies and polluters of the natural world. In the magazines that I have from the 70s, there are several ads from Shell oil, from Caterpillar tractors. So companies that we know today don't necessarily align with the mission of advancing geographic information, right? If we think of geography as inherently tied to the land and therefore inherently tied to environmental concerns, a company like Shell doesn't really align with that mission, nor do, companies like Lockheed Martin, for example, which is a known funder of National Geographic. So, National Geographic has a very difficult job of representing the people and places of the world in ways that are factual and that are compassionate and that provoke and illuminate understanding, right? But it does so with a history that is really complicated. And it felt almost like this connection that really clicked of this deliberate dismantling of this one depiction of reality and reweaving it into another, right as we, in this timeline that we're in right now, are at the edge of like a new informational age, a new understanding of how information moves and of how our environment and our planet is changing. Like those things are very pressing concerns for us right now. And so these little like throwaway poems that I was making in the morning before I would start my real work became my real work. And so they became a collection of poems that I'm calling Friend of the Wind. Friend of the Wind takes its name from a title of one of the articles in one of these National Geographic magazines that is about an endangered bird species native to the Great Lakes, coincidentally. And all of this is happening alongside the work that I did when I was too restless to be in the studio, which meant taking long bike rides along the Boise Greenway, along the Boise River. And at the same time, I was reading a lot about rivers and about the significance of rivers in civilization. I read an article called "The First Water is the Body" by Natalie Diaz. And she says, how can I translate, not in words, but in belief, that a river is a body, as alive as you or I, that there can be no life without it? I was also reading Rob McFarlane's book, literally titled "Is a River Alive?", which follows 3 kind of expressions of the rights of nature movement across the world, following 3 different groups of people in different geographies as they work to declare one of their rivers as having the same rights as a human person, therefore could be advocated for like in a court of law. That's their kind of way of, their kind of Hail Mary, like last ditch effort of like, can we save a river that has been polluted into oblivion? You know, do we have to make it a person for it to be valuable? At least under the logic of the courts, right? But that's just a language that is used to honor the inherent dignity and agency of the living world, right? And again, as I'm here, as I'm spending all this time every day, I spend my days in the river and my nights sleeping here in the James Castle house. This overlap of concepts and of ways of being became very easily and compactly and concisely joined in a word we hear all the time, riverbed. And what's interesting about riverbeds is that riverbeds, I think if I were to give an elevator pitch for riverbeds are a like trace of memory, right? It's a way that land remembers. Even when rivers are buried, even when rivers are moved by, municipal construction efforts, they retain their original paths or their projected paths into the future where they want to move. And so again, I felt like this idea of like agency, living in this thing that we can't see, that I can't see at least, that became very powerful. And a riverbed as being the underbelly, the bottom of the river, right? And the bed being, or sleep being the underbelly of consciousness. There's also a phrase you hear all the time called the river of time or the river of consciousness, right? Thought and feeling being ascribed the qualities of water. And so these are just some snippets from my time along the Boise River. I started pulling detritus out of it, weaving it into basket forms. Again, this dismantling and reweaving of material, a kind of scavenger's mission through the world. I, made prints, made news stories about the river. I had a show, an exhibition that opened in Millerton, New York, in a place upstate. It used to be a lettuce farm, but it's now a gallery called the Re-Institute. And I sent a box of prints to a friend over there. And the box of prints was a set of instructions about how to gather some stones from the surrounding landscape in Millerton, New York, and to find a place for them in the architecture of that gallery. So this is a work called Grounding Game. And it was, again, an experiment in communicating without words. And I made these prints here in Boise after spending days along the river. And on the day that my friend was to assemble the artwork, I spent the entire day along the Boise River. Even though you were 2 hour apart in time zone, I tried to match up with the time that they would be assembling this artwork. So as they're handling stones, I'm handling stones, right? Just on different time zones. Again, what is common language without speech? And I think because we're running low on time, I'll pass through these weird diagrams that I made late last night. But they're very important to me, but not as exciting for you all. But I've been thinking about what separates people who are trying to communicate with each other. All these differences in sensation and cognition and culture and language. What separates people from the land? It's the same things, right? It's that we don't know, many of us do not know the languages of the land, right? And therefore think we cannot communicate and cannot have a shared understanding with the land. And I just don't think that's true. And and we're also inevitably entangled with the land already, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. And my thesis of my whole existence and body of work is that disability amplifies that entanglement with the land and makes ecological change and destruction impossible to ignore because of the effects that has on one's body. And like changes in the land are affecting the body, but also like disabled people and their experiences are creating new narratives about or contributing to really important narratives about ecological relationships about the land. So disability multiplies entanglement with the land, blurs the line between outside and inside, speech and silence, awake and asleep, river and bed. This is a quote from one of my favorite poets, Chris Martin. I'm becoming weather and I don't plan on doing it alone. So inviting others into this perception of, a sensory world that extends beyond oneself, that is entangled with the land. That's what it feels like to me, like I'm becoming weather and I'm not doing it alone. I'm inviting all of you with me. This is a recording from the Boise River. And it's a contact microphone attached to a tree root that is partially submerged in the water. So what you're hearing is the river moving through the tree root. You are hearing the sound of the water through the tree root's body. And I was so taken aback by that experience. I mean, I played you a tiny fragment of it, but it was 2 hours that I spent with the river, in conversation with the river. And it was the thing with recording with a contact microphone is it's a very tactile experience. Like you can't actually situate the microphone to hear anything, to listen to anything without also touching, making contact with the thing you want to listen to. So the idea that like listening and touching are separate activities, first of all, like hasn't made sense to me, doesn't register to me that way. But I love recording with contact microphones because it's a way for me to also demonstrate to others this experience of listening and touching concurrently. And so this experience with the river ended up into this longer essay called Abridging Language, which goes into the history of how other people, specifically other disabled people, register listening and touch concurrently in ways that I do not, but have learned from. So that's a second piece of writing that came out of this time here. It's a small book that you can also see in the studio and touch in the studio. And yeah, I mean, our senses connect us to the land. Sensory difference reveals new ways of navigating through and communicating with and telling stories about the land. And I'm going to leave you all with this last, oops, sorry, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, sorry, Zoom is hard. Zoom is very challenging. I'm going to leave you all with this little fragment, again, from a decolonial feminist epistemology of the bed. And it says, but is it that our rhythms and forms disintegrate in the face of illnesses, debilitation, or that we submit to release the fiction that we were ever a singular being to begin with? How does chronic illness force a confrontation with our attachment to be a one? What chronic illness, despite its material terrorizing of the body and psyche, opens us to a richness of being otherwise? What if in the falling together of days over days and nights over nights, the blur, the celebration of mass, the play of mass. Sorry, I can't see above the Zoom window. As a phenomenon of indistinctness, of indiscretion, the blood, the blues, the bruise.
Thank you, Ariana, for sharing with us for your journey, what has been on your mind and what you've been curious about. Ariana had a lot of questions there, but I'm just wondering if there are any pressing questions online that we might share, or if there are none. I just want to go ahead and close us out. We went a little bit over time.
I knew I would. I told you I was gonna go over time.
They are very passionate about their work and the research, as you can see, which is amazing. Like, it's a superpower, right? You're very intentional, and I say you're very true to yourself and like your desires and curiosities. So that's really inspiring. We've enjoyed having you here. I know all the staff, and just in conversation, that we've been able to have with you. We've really appreciated the time that you have been here with us and shared your experience with us. And honestly, like, we just wish you the best going forward, because I see how promising your career is and all the things that you have to look forward to coming up in your life. So thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing with us. And thank you, Sierra, for being here and translating or interpreting, sorry. And y'all have a good evening. And for those of you here, we can go ahead and enjoy some snacks and spend some time looking at Ariana's work.
Thank you, everyone.